Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kanika Pulliam, Assistant Director of Education and Professional Development here at ASBMB. And I'm thrilled to be moderating this session featuring three speakers who will represent innovation, technology transfer, and biotech entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, Tom Kiselak, who is going to be our moderator today, is unable to join us, so I'll be helping him out. We'll have three speakers. Our first speaker will be Caroline Deely. She's a professor and she represents being a seasoned inventor and faculty entrepreneur. Our next speaker will be Carter Palmer. He's a scientist and biotech founder. And our final speaker will be Cliff Michaels, and he'll represent research, commercialization, licensing, and academic industry partnerships. So before we dive in, as a quick reminder, you're welcome to submit your questions at any time using the QA feature at the bottom of your screen. You're also welcome to use the chat box to interact with the speakers and the other attendees of this webinar. I do want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on the ASBMB website. So first, I'd like to start with having each speaker provide an introduction and tell us a little bit more about their experience in commercializing academic research. And so, Caroline, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kanika, for inviting me and the other panelists to this webinar. I'm really excited to share in this discussion. I'm a professor at the University of Connecticut Health Center, where our medical school and dental school are located. My area of research is actually regenerative medicine and cartilage repair and osteoarthritis treatments. And about 15 years ago, I guess, I started to get involved in innovation and technology development completely by accident, through a discovery that happened in my lab that my tech transfer office, called me up and said, hey, we think we should do something with this, we should patent it and form a company. And basically that started me down this road. Since then, there have been several patents in related areas, and I've started three companies, two of which are still active, but very early stage. And I've also gotten involved in sort of spreading entrepreneurship and innovation, training and exposure around campus. So I direct a program for students for undergraduate students and master's students to basically work in startups and get exposure to the startup environment and to the tech transfer environment. I also am the faculty lead for NSF's I-Corps program at our university, which is a program that some of you listening might be interested in learning about. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's accessible to across the nation for free faculty entrepreneurship training. And I think that's plenty to start with. So I'll turn it over to our next panelist to introduce themselves.
All right, Carter, you're up.
Again, I'd love to echo Caroline's sentiment. Thank you so much for the invite, Kanika, and I'm really happy to be here to speak and share my experiences with all of you. Again, my name is Carter Palmer. I'm co-founder and CEO of the company Third Element Bio, which is a company that myself and a couple peers started to help rejuvenate the brain's immune system. A little bit about my background. I actually studied tissue engineering and biomaterials in undergrad at Tufts University. And that's probably where I caught the bug a little bit for entrepreneurship and technology development. So immediately after my undergrad, I went and worked as the first hire at a company called Vaxis Technologies, a spin out from Tufts University, and spent the next 4 years there really helping them work through the early stage development and sort of commercialization path that they're on right now. Really personal interest drove me to make a pretty enormous switch. So I ended up coming back and doing my PhD at UC San Diego, shifting back to the academic side to really get a grasp of neuroscience. And it was really my primary goal was to better understand Alzheimer's disease. So I studied Alzheimer's disease and how the brain ages in humans, really, and how this might actually lead to different aspects of Alzheimer's disease. And discoveries made there led to the identification of novel targets that we really think have a lot of potential to help let your brain's immune system heal itself. So in my PhD and then in a brief postdoc, I developed therapeutics that could hit these targets, patented those, and then spun that out. So Third Element now has SBIR awarded from the National Institute on Aging, and is close to closing our pre-seed round to really move forward on the development path going forward. So thank you.
Carter, Cliff.
Hi, everybody. And yeah, just like everyone said, thank you so much for letting me join today. I'm excited to speak about what we do because I think we have the most fun job at the university in the tech transfer office. So Clifford Michaels, I have a background in neuroscience, PhD, did my graduate work at Emory University in Atlanta. And while there, did an internship during the end of my graduate studies in the technology transfer office at Emory. Got bit by the bug, as Carter said, and haven't looked back. Have been part of a tech transfer office since then. And that was almost 20 years ago, which is frightening to say at this point. Doesn't feel like it was that long ago. Right. And so just a little bit of a background about, when we say tech transfer, what do we mean by that, right? It does vary a little bit university to university, but by and large, we are the central university office that is charged with going out, identifying great ideas, innovations, discoveries coming from research activities across our campuses, working to evaluate, make what we say are investment decisions, patent filing decisions, those sort of things to protect the IP, and then working either to find existing companies that might be interested in developing that discovery or invention into a product, or as Caroline and Carter have both mentioned, helping build new enterprises, startup companies, spin-outs, whatever you want to call them, that can take those innovations forward, do the next steps in development, and then either develop it all the way to a product, or at some point be acquired by a larger, bigger company along the way. And so, again, really excited to be here and share sort of a university perspective on the conversation.
All right, thank you, Cliff. Thank you, everybody. So I'll start with a round of questions, and everyone, please just jump in if you can respond to this particular question, but I think everybody can respond to this one. How can researchers effectively identify market opportunities for their research findings?
So I'll jump in, but I know we're all gonna input. So I'll jump in. I think I would actually turn this question around, and I would encourage researchers to find out what the specific needs are in the area that they're working in, and then see if the research fits it or can be pivoted to fit it. Because you really don't want to be developing a solution and then once you have it, go looking for the problem that it's supposed to solve. So it's really market opportunity, yes, but maybe more a finer point product market fit. And the product, I know that can be a little off-putting to researchers. I know when I was first getting started, every time I heard the word customer and product, I'm like, no, I'm not selling soap, I'm curing things. But essentially we're talking about a product or a service. And in the biomedical space, to find out what is that fit, I would say interview clinicians, find clinicians and, sit down and actually interview them, describe your research and where you think it might have an application, and then see if they think, yeah, that's true, or maybe they have other ideas where it might be a better fit. That's called customer discovery, and it is absolutely essential to ensure that you have that market opportunity. Through that process, you'll learn a tremendous amount, and you might even be able to end up recruiting some clinical collaborators to your project and maybe some key opinion leaders to your team.
Piggyback on that, and Caroline, I can tell that you are an I-Core advocate, right? Customer discovery, right? What does that mean, right? It's just such a critical question. On the, sort of maybe a little bit earlier, in the pipeline, in collaborating or partnering with industry, right, on a research project, I think it's also really important to, fundamentally understand where the industry partner is coming from and what drives them, right? I mean, it's a little bit of that customer discovery, but it's okay. What does a company care about? If I'm going to work with a company on a research project together, something that's more collaborative and maybe IP hasn't been created yet, what is really going to drive them? Because I think understanding and putting yourselves a little bit in their shoes will really open the doors for more fruitful collaboration, right? And I always like to bring that up because I think a lot of times we wait until the discovery has happened to have some of these conversations. And I think we can pull them forward a little bit and talk a little bit on the front end about, hey, well, how do we collaborate with industry? I think that's particularly relevant in the world we are today, where federal funding is, changing. The landscape is changing, and we will look to industry partners maybe for a little bit more earlier, engagement in some of the research that's going on.
Yeah, I'd like to echo both those statements. Really, it's about communicating, it's about talking to people, understanding where the field is. And this is not necessarily the academic field, because that's not necessarily the same as the commercialization, the development field. So that's really trying to grasp where that is. And there's lots that you can read. There are great different sort of podcasts that you can listen to. Stat, Fierce Biotech, Endpoints all send out little daily updates, and those are really quick things that you can just sort of start tracking. Where's the commercialization, the development of my field going? Where is it heading? Who's it moving towards? But again, from someone who was recently in that, I guess, trainee position and PhD and postdoc, I really encourage you to reach out, especially as a trainee. Most people would pick up the phone if I just said, hey, I'm interested in learning more about what your company's doing or where this field is going. I think you get a lot of people who are quite willing to share their visions.
Looks like there's a question from the chat.
Yeah.
You see
Fierce
that?
is a great
Can you
one.
mention-
Endpoints has a good quick one, and also Stat has a podcast that's pretty good.
Okay. Thank you.
I like Fierce Biotech.
Yeah.
Okay. Cliff, you brought up IP. I just wanted to bring up this question. What role does intellectual property protection play in the commercialization process, and how should researchers approach this? 'Cause I'm just thinking about maybe people, they have no idea where to start. They don't know the lingo. What does IP mean? Even tech transfer.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and it's one of the things that here at the University of Kansas that we've been really trying to tackle is lowering the barriers to entry as much as we can to work with our team and give sort of some basic understanding of why this stuff matters, right? We talk about it, but why is it important and why is it relevant to you as a researcher, right? And so, on that note, right, I think particularly if we're talking about life sciences, you need to take into account and understand sort of how long a pharmaceutical, for example, takes to develop, right? It's going to take an enormous amount of time, a lot of effort, a lot of funding to develop from bench to bedside, as everybody likes to say. And so IP becomes, I think, increasingly important when you're looking at those sort of long, very capital money intensive timelines, right? Because what does IP give you? IP and intellectual property protection is giving you some sort of proprietary, sort of monopoly space around your invention, an ability to keep other people out from using it, right? And why is that important? Well, if I'm going to invest a bunch of money, I want to be able to recover some of that money and hopefully make a profit at the end. And how do I do that? Well, it's by having this sort of monopoly around my invention that nobody else can use, again, at the end of the day. And so IP is really, again, really, really important. And a couple things I think for those who are sort of coming out of the university side to keep in mind. One is, you should communicate frequently, often with your tech transfer office. You don't need to know everything, and you certainly don't need to be the expert in everything around IP, but you should be connecting with them frequently whenever the light bulb goes off and you think, hey, I may have something here that could be worthwhile or of interest to industry or useful and develop into a product, whatever it might be, right? Pick up the phone, have the conversation. The other key piece there is to understand that, we talk particularly in life sciences and med tech, the value of IP, patent filings. Well, one of the requirements, to have a patent and for patent rights is we can't have put something out into the public before we file our patent application. And so the classic example is we have an inventor who has created something or discovered something that is wonderful and has a great place in the market. And unfortunately, they published it 6 months ago, and now we are on our back foot, right? We should have filed our patent application before they published. That is a tricky situation. And so, again, sort of key takeaways there is you don't need to know everything about everything when it comes to IP. You can rely on your tech transfer office, communicate with them frequently, and then particularly if you have something that you think is interesting and you're going to publish, let them know before you publish.
Yeah. If I can jump in quick, I think fundamentally exclusivity is foundational to the monetization of all drug development. It's that simple. If you have a 10-page pitch deck to go talk to investors, one of those 10 pages is going to be on the IP, and they are going to dig on it. Both what IP do you have and what IP are you going to generate? How are you going to protect yourself? It's right there. So absolutely essential. Just go find your cliff somewhere at your institution. Go find him.
Yeah, it's your competitive advantage, right? And that is key to hooking anybody else to fund or get excited about your invention or discovery.
I'll also just mention from a sort of a faculty member's point of view that I think things are changing, a little bit. I do see that I think, generally researchers are more educated and have a better idea of commercialization space. Certainly when I got involved, I literally knew absolutely nothing, had hardly even heard of a patent and didn't really know anything at all. But I think it's in some ways it can be scary, a little bit scary to faculty members, and they think, oh, that's just about making money. I don't want to make money. I want to do my research. But one of the concepts that I think is really, I've really appreciated is that path from bench to bedside. It's not a direct path. It goes through commercialization. So it's really bench to commercialization to bedside, because it can't get there. And that's true for engineering and devices and things like that as well. If it doesn't have a societal benefit in terms of a finance, someone's got to make money. It's not going to see the light of day. And that's a shame, particularly when we can play a role. I also wanted to mention that sometimes there also is a concern that, well, I don't want to get involved in commercializable research because then I can't then I can't publish. But what you pointed out, Cliff and Carter, same thing, that there are perils there. But by the same token, again, keeping in touch with your tech transfer office, is a good thing to do. They're not scary people. They'll use the word disclosure. Again, that's nothing to be worried about. It's just basically sharing that you have an idea, so they can put a pin in it, and they can help you see, okay, is this worth patenting? Firstly, and they'll help you determine, are there competitors, and that could be really useful because it could inform ways that you maybe want to shift your research to avoid an area that already is kind of busy, and maybe get into, change your experiments a little bit to do something that's a little different and novel. And lastly, I also wanted to mention that if you do make a mistake and you do publish, or your graduate student gives a poster, or even an undergraduate thesis, honors thesis, your honors department posts it. That's public. In the United States, you have a 1-year grace period. So you can still file and protect that invention, that innovation, in the US markets. And for many markets, the US market is the one you want. That depends on your technology, but it doesn't mean everything is a lost cause.
Right. It's not the nail in the coffin. Thank you. Necessarily. When you have published prior to your patent filing.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. You saw the question in the chat box about that.
Yeah. Cliff, do you want to mention about provisionals and kind of how that works?
Sure. I'm trying to be careful about not going into too many of the, sort of details, right?
It's important.
It is important, right? Yeah, I mean, so in terms of patents, sort of patent practice and such, right? Often what we will file first is a provisional patent in the US. And a provisional patent is that pin in your invention, as you say, or the placeholder almost, right? That gives you a 12-month period to make changes, to make adjustments, sort of hold your place in line in terms of patentability before you have to go through the expense, the time, the effort of filing a full patent application. And so it's sort of this 12-month US specific, like they don't have it outside the US. It's a great thing. And so we file them often. And one of the nice things about them, again, is that, you file it and then you're sort of buying yourself 12 months to continue to improve your invention. And at the end of that 12 months, we have to make a decision. Do we go forward with a full patent application? Do we not file anything? But you bought yourself 12 months to learn more, to do more, to answer some critical questions, and maybe get yourself to a no-go, no-go position, which I think is really, really valuable. So we file a lot of them. And, my colleagues may slap my hand for saying this, but, we can file them quickly if we have to, right before you publish, right? We don't like to do that because it's sort of like you're as good as the time and money you spend, but we can do it again to hold our place in line. And so I think there's some value in that as well, right? Sort of being the quick and dirty way of at least getting your place in line in terms of your patent rights. So yeah, thank you, Caroline, for bringing that up.
And there's a question from Caroline in the QA box that we can answer now. Someone wants to know, how did it happen that your patent office contacted you for the first IP? How did they hear about your work? And I assumed it was not published yet.
That is such a good question. And I imagine Cliff can also chime in on this again, since it's sort of related to patenting. But there's like feelers out there, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But I think communication is really important. And so the tech transfer office has individuals who sort of specialize in different areas, life science or engineering or computer technologies, and they get out there and they talk with faculty members and department chairs, and find out, so hey, what's going on? Maybe hear about something at a networking event or a seminar, that a group attended on entrepreneurship, and maybe there was a casual conversation they followed up in. So I actually can't pinpoint exactly what it was, but basically kind of word got out, if you will. I don't know quite how to say that. I guess it may have been that I was a recipient of a sort of a pilot program around this area of work, and so they were sort of kind of tracking it unofficially in a way, and so there were conversations. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
I mean,
hope that helps.
We've got a couple mechanisms, right? I mean, I think the you mentioned the biggest one, right, is sort of word of mouth, right? And we are trying to turn advocates, faculty who have had the experience into advocates with their ears open that direct them to us, because we've got a lot of researchers. It's a big research community to serve, and we can't be in touch with everybody. But we do a lot of departmental seminars and school seminars, and sort of our attitude is we never turn down an invitation to go out and advocate for the value that we bring to the research enterprise. And so we'll get in front of and speak to everybody. And so if your interest has sort of been piqued at your home institution, I would encourage you to go to your TTO and say, hey, would you like to come speak to a student, this graduate student body or our department or something like that? Because most tech transfer offices are happy to receive the invite and not have to push nearly as much. We have a couple other things that we sort of built in technically to the grant process, right? Like at proposal or at award or at closeout, where we have sort of check marks and say, okay, we're closing out a 4-year, R01 or whatever it might be. Oh, maybe an invention has happened. We receive lists, we track some of those down. So there's a little bit of data, sort of mining in there as well, at least on our end.
Okay. There's some other 2 questions that are the same, and I'm sure some other audience members are thinking the same thing. They have some great ideas potentially for starting a biotech company. But how do you know if that project or idea is patentable, or if it's something that you could potentially commercialize?
Can I jump in first from sort of the administrative TTO sort of point of view, and then I think Carter and Caroline, I bet you both have good things to add, right? One would be, again, it goes back to that your TTO is not a scary place, right? I like to say, at least within our system, part of the service we offer to our research community is you can send us your idea, right? And we will do a certain level of diligence on that idea. It's not just about whether it's patentable, at least not in our shop. It's about what is the market? Can we identify a product? Can we identify a problem that it's trying to solve? All of those things. And so many TTOs like ours do that as a service to the research community. You give us your idea, we will do that level of diligence, we will provide it back to you, and you will hopefully know more about the opportunity after working with us than you did, ahead of time. That's, sort of, again, sort of a typical tech transfer office. And why I say we're not scary is, this is, our job, right, is to turn over all the stones and try to help develop and improve the opportunities that we see when we receive them from our faculty. And I won't get into sort of customer discovery or some of those other sort of questions. I'll leave that for the rest of our panelists.
Yeah, I can jump in. One thing I know we keep saying go to your TTO. I've always sort of thought of a TTO as a commercialization PI who will write your paper for you, which for a graduate student is the greatest thing in the world. If you have something that's worth patenting, you basically get to go them, share all the data with them. They'll dive in, do the research, see what else is there. And then if they're going to patent it, they'll just write it. And you get that on your CV, resume, whole career path is a great thing. So again, going to them is fantastic. In terms of, I think really starting to go and do that outreach. Is this an idea that's able to commercialize? One thing that was fantastic for us, and I know a lot of other first-time founders do, are these different accelerator programs or sort of trainee programs. And I'll let Caroline talk about the NSF I-Corps. I think this is the perfect segue for that one, but I'll also plug a second, which is entirely student-run called Nucleate. Nucleates across America at this point in a lot of different settings. Started in Boston, really one of these hubs for biotech development, but has really made a huge effort to spread worldwide. They take no equity whatsoever. They do a really good job, from my experience, in actually trying to pair researchers with business people. So oftentimes MBA students in that local community will get paired up, and you'll sort of get that business side view as well. You start to get mentors, you start to get some exposure for your idea. And I think finding situations like that where you can get people to come in, and again, you can be entirely confidential with all of your ideas. You don't need to share exactly what you're going to do, but you get people to come in and start giving you this idea of like, yes, this fits within the market. Yes, people want this. Yes, this is something that's commercializable. So I think that's one way to go.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Nucleate, because it's one that it's actually they just started a chapter at UConn fairly recently, but it's definitely has spread widely. Um, I have a little more familiarity and history with the NSF I-Corps program. So I-Corps stands for, I guess, Innovation Corps, but this is basically, the federal government's answer to sort of the United States falling behind in the tech development realm globally. And so they developed and kind of implemented, based on principles of Steve Blank at Stanford, business principles at Stanford, of basically a lean startup, and how with the minimal amount of resources, you can, come up with the right idea for your business. So test your idea, find out whether it has that market opportunity. Again, a lot of it is by interviewing and talking with people in the industry. My realm is a little more in the sort of healthcare innovation. So maybe with insurance, with insurance payers, hospital administrations, um, different kinds of industry manufacturers or clinicians, and finding out from them, okay, what are your pain points and where does my innovation fit? And in that process, you're not sharing the details of your innovation. You learn how to talk about it, without giving away the secret sauce. And it ends up not being all that difficult once you learn how to do it. Your tech transfer office, your friendly TTO can help you do that. And then you become very, very comfortable. And if at first it may feel a little awkward, but that's why, there are these support systems like Nucleate or I-Corps that can help you with it. The I-Corps program is available nationally. If you go to the website, which is in the resources link to this webinar, you'll come to a landing page. And if you look under hubs, on the left side, it'll give you a map of the hub system. Every hub has between 10 and 20 institutions that are affiliated with it. Program is all free. It's for primarily for deep tech, so not consumer goods and services, but for technologies developed, in academia, in research labs. Nobody takes a stake. Again, you're given mentors, you're given advice, exposure to investors. But any of these accelerators, there may be things offered by your local, small business association. Right now, I know someone taking an SBIR and STTR training course from their local SBDC in their community. So you can find resources wherever you are, even if you're not at an R1. That doesn't mean that they don't have, for example, a link to an I-Corps program or a nucleate, site, if you will, or chapter. And I'd say take as many as you can, because you'll always learn. And that's really what this is all about. It's a journey, and being open to learn as you go. I think you can tell we kind of like what we do. From our big smiles, I think you can tell that this is actually kind of fun. We enjoy it.
Follow up on that, just two things that sort of stick out to me from what you said, right? One is your small business development, sort of for, right, those sort of things are great, right? Our innovation park, for example, offers a whole bunch of accelerators and other sort of programming that's available to the community and also available to the university, the university research community. And we try often to route early innovators in that direction, right? To go, because they'll hear this, and the more I think you hear these kind of conversations, the more the questions that should be asked early become routine, and you start to build them, almost what you were saying earlier, into your research enterprise, and then all of a sudden you've gone and become this just tremendous innovator in terms of research. The other thing that we come across very often, particularly with life science innovations, is the definition of customer and trying to understand who the customer is. And I love that you bring it up, because we see a lot of pharmaceuticals, we'll see medical devices, we see health IT and digital health applications, right? And it's always focused on the patient. And I understand why the patient and the benefit to the patient is so important. But ultimately, who's buying the software, who's buying the digital health solution, right? It's the hospital system, it's the care facility, it's something along those lines. Okay, that's a different customer, and we need to think about that innovation from their perspective and what they care about. Ultimately, yes, the patient benefits, but what do they care about? How are we going to save them money? How are we going to save them time? Those sort of considerations. And I think it's been fun with a lot of our life science and healthcare innovators to sort of see the sort of gears change, over time. And the next innovation that comes, they're already thinking about, well, yes, the patient benefits, but the customer is ultimately X, Y, or Z, the insurance company, whoever it might be.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked, how about provisional filing effect? How does that affect patents in Europe? Can someone answer that?
I guess I have to. I should have put this out in the beginning too, right? Like, I'm not a patent attorney, I'm a PhD. And so everything I say I've learned from others or on the job. So take that not as legal advice as the attorneys in my office would say. Right. So that provisional holds your place in line, sort of everywhere, right? And so, right, it is the first thing that you need to put in the ground. And so it'll hold that date, that very important date of this is when I had invented this thing. It'll hold that place in line, regardless of whether we file in Europe or Japan or China or Canada. To step back, right, just a sort of big picture sort of flow, right? Oftentimes we file a provisional, 12 months later it will expire. We file something called a PCT. A PCT is sort of an international style application that lasts for 18 months. And at the end of that 18-month, when that PCT expires, you choose the individual countries you want to pursue in. But the whole time, right, the all-important priority date, as we say, the earliest date that you can demonstrate you had your invention is all the way back at when that original provisional was filed. So long story short, right? Filing the provisional early, right, in the US, puts your stake in the ground regardless of ultimately where you end up filing the full-on patent applications.
Okay. Thank you, Cliff. I want to shift the conversation into funding now. What strategies have you found most effective for securing funding and investment for commercializing your biomedical research? Like Carter and Caroline can answer this, and you can, anything you can contribute, Cliff, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go first here. Um, I think that there's a lot of different strategies. So if you're just getting into this, one of the things you need to understand is that funding in our space is not going to come from one type of entity. And that's really quite important, right? So there are federal grants. These are small business innovative research grants, SBIRs. That program, in all hopes, is going to stay strong moving forward, and that's a really important one for early stage funding. There are family funds and granting agencies that are specific to individual indications or spaces. There are people associated with Alzheimer's drug development or Parkinson's or other various other diseases, right? There are angel investors. These are people who are really passionate about the type of discovery or translation you're trying to make, and they're willing to invest because they're really passionate about that. And then, of course, there are sort of your standard venture capital investors that are going to put more money in to really move that technology forward. When it comes to what strategy is best, it's going to depend a ton on where your technology development is and what path you're trying to pursue. But at the end of the day, both in the companies that I've worked in previously and at ours, we're approaching all of them at the same time, right? And I think that that's really quite important, especially for early stage companies. They sort of build off each other. So if you can get an SBIR, that's this really important external scientific validation. That's a peer panel where 30 different people sit down and choose the grants that are best to fund, right? VCs or angels love to see that you've gotten an SBIR because oftentimes they won't know the science well enough to actually vet it. And they use that SBIR as I guess, a vetting mechanism for their own investments, right? And then it goes back the other way. SBIRs are more likely to go to companies that have gotten interest from investors. So you really want to reach out in as many different ways as you can and actually start pursuing these multiple different paths, usually at the same time, to really push these forward. And again, a lot of times you're going to have to get creative. You talk to founders who have been successful, they're often applying for grants that you wouldn't quite expect them to apply for. But get creative, find really interesting solutions, and go find the money that's out there.
Jump in. And I'll be, I'll be a little honest, right? It's no easier to find commercializable funding or funding for commercializable research than it is to find funding for regular research. So unfortunately, no good news there. And honestly, I found it to be a real challenge. I find investors are actually a little bit leery of funding full-time academics. So, and that's a thing. So the sooner they kind of view them as somebody who has like a split interest, right? That said, where I've had success is really kind of starting small, with internal, like sort of internal pilot university programs meant to spur innovation, state programs maybe for the same thing, sometimes around like a stem cell initiative or a quantum initiative or whatever it may be. Sometimes those kinds of things can work if they are in your area. And cobbling those together to, just get to the next step. And then, doing as, Carter says, applying for other grants. The SBIRs and STTRs have been sort of the more academic side of you hear about SBIRs, but STTR is the sort of academic side of that, where the PI can still be an academic faculty member. I can't be a PI of an SBIR because I'm full-time faculty. So the amounts of funding for each grant is kind of the same, but the issue is that the pool of funding is radically different. And there's a lot more money available in the pool of grants that are funded for SBIRs. So STTRs right now, it's a little unclear how that's going to go. So think about those things. The sooner you can find a partner who can, serve as PI, who's not at your institution and can serve as PI, then you can go after the SBIR side. And that again is going to put you you'll have just this bigger, it's a bigger pie. It's just a bigger pie of competition for that. So I think that's a strategy that can be useful, and a model that I'm seeing really beginning to take hold. And Cliff, maybe you're seeing the same thing at your institution, is for faculty members working on commercializable projects. Find that graduate student who just like cannot get enough of this, and they'll be there. Some students, no, but there'll be some students that just really get excited about this kind of work. And when they graduate, they just might be willing to be a postdoc / CEO for your company, where they could be funded through the company and be that CEO, and they can then be the PI of the SBIR. And frankly, they can be trained to actually take that company forward and into success. And this model is definitely working. And it allows the faculty member to go back to their main lab and re-innovate, come up with yet another innovation, and then hopefully spin that out. And I've seen that model working very successfully in institutional settings.
Yep. We want to feed that model. We want to grow that model here because we have seen it be successful at many institutions, and we have examples, right? But it is the idea that the graduate student or the postdoc, when the company is spun out, spins out with the company. And now you've got somebody who has the technical background, but also has a real focus on, to talk about your, sort of split interest, right? Has a real core focus on the company and the company's success, which I think is important because it demonstrates to follow-on investors and such, a real skin in the game, right? We get that, that question a lot, right? Are they really into it, or is it just sort of a hobby for them, right? And when you are part of the company and you're a one employee company, well, yeah, it's going to demonstrate that those grants are really important because that's how you're feeding yourself, right? And there's that sort of ethos behind that. Just two other things, I would encourage you to really look at the university resources. I know that many of us continually are asked to build more and more sort of seed, proof of concept, prototyping funds, right? And they may be small dollars, $10,000 to $50,000, but they're going to get you to that next stage. And, to something Carter had said, once somebody has demonstrated that they're willing to take the risk, it becomes easier for others to get on board with taking the risk and funding you. The other thing that that we have here that I imagine many institutions have, or I know many of our peers do, is we do have sort of an angel network, right, of alumni that's built with our alumni association that you can go in front of, and yes, they will fund, but more so they're there to mentor and advise. You come, you pitch, and they provide feedback, and again, sort of prepares you for when you get your opportunity to really pitch for significant dollars. That's been a good one. And we, like many other institutions, also have a captive investment arm that is sort of sitting out there. Many of the R1s, big institutions, will have that as well. And it's almost this whole chain, right? Like we're sort of at the seed and POC prototyping stage. That's what we internally are funding. There's the SBIR that comes next. Then maybe there's the angel network. Then maybe there's a captive venture fund down the line, and trying to have a whole pipeline that as the innovation matures, the university has a place for its innovators to go to seek additional funding as the opportunity continues to develop.
Okay. Thinking more about funding, how can researchers best collaborate with industry partners or startups to advance their research? How do you reach out? What's the process, possibly? If any of you can provide some advice.
I'll start, right? Again,
Yeah,
I'm not
I
the
was
one.
hoping you would, because you already mentioned industry partners, and
Yeah.
that's one of your.
It is, yeah, it's sort of it's not directly under the TTO, but it's sort of our sister unit or sister office, right? We work very closely together because we happen to have, in many institutions, we'll have an industry partnership office. But again, sort of the two fundamental things that I come back to in any of those opportunities is, again, to understand where the company is coming from and what drives the company, because I think that really is sort of the key to getting to yes and working well together. It's, you may be very interested in doing yours, sort of, exploring some area of research, but again, if there's not a deliverable that clearly aligns with the company goal, it's probably not going to be a very successful, relationship, and the funding may not happen. So just a couple, again, sort of really, really basic things that I think of that are just good practice. One is, it is entirely worthwhile when you are at your academic conferences to keep the business cards, recognize who is coming up and talking to you when you're presenting your poster or presenting at a presentation, and somebody comes up to you afterwards. The companies are sending scouts constantly, right? And those scouts are looking either for IP that we might have that they want to in-license and develop themselves, but a lot of times they're just looking to plug holes in sort of their knowledge gap or their needs in terms of, we need an expert in this domain. Let me go out and find the world's best expert in, cell therapy or whatever that area might be. So those contacts are worthwhile, and they are good, and they are there to be leveraged. So if somebody comes up from a company and is speaking to you about your poster, they're genuinely interested, and you should ask another question. You should get their card and follow up with them, because there may be a research opportunity to come out of that. The other thing I always like to mention is, there are a number of third-party sort of open innovation platforms that you can subscribe to, right? And these are places and third parties where a company comes and says, again, we have a need for this, right? And they're open to proposals from academia, right? And those get distributed out, and anybody can apply to them. I'm trying to think of some of the names of them. There's one called Halo that is fairly popular. Um, I can think of a couple others. Halo is the one that just sort of comes top of mind, but those are, again, open innovation places where you can sign up, you'll see what industry is looking for, and you can apply. Those applications are usually like 2 pages to begin with, and then, if you go down. But it's a very easy way to sort of dip your toes into some of those conversations if they find them, to be a little bit intimidating.
I'll also add that, and sort of from the life sciences and biomedical perspective, that, for example, I found that through my clinical collaborators, I've met industry partners who are their drug suppliers, who are their device suppliers, and they're not. I mean, I don't know who those people are, but they interact with them because they see the representatives. And so they can actually, your collaborators can actually help serve as channels to some of the industry partners that you really want to reach. And it could be that your collaborators, they may not be in a position to kind of company talk, but you are, and all you need is a friendly introduction, and then you can be on your way.
Right. And also, just on that note, right, depending on your institution, you may have industry engagement, again, professionals that are there with you that will ride through those initial conversations, ride shotgun with you is what I say, because they can be scary and intimidating. And this is their job. If you don't have those, most of your TTOs, again, we will try our best to sit there with you, because again, we understand that industry can be intimidating. And again, we'll sit there with you and ride shotgun.
Yeah, I'll second that. Your friendly TTO also gives you some credibility in the conversations, right? It's not just you; it's like you and the university, have this innovation that you're putting forth, and really that is actually the truth. If your university has decided to pursue patenting, that's a significant investment on their part, and they really are rooting for you and want you to succeed.
Can we drop in there on that investment real quick and just give people a scope? We've talked about the patent process a couple different times, right? Just to understand sort of the investment that your institution is making when it files a patent application. You're thinking for that initial provisional right? You can be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 in cost, and then it continues to increase throughout the rest of the life cycle of the patent. And so, just for the U.S., by the time we get to an issued patent, sort of end of the line, your university has invested somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000, depending on how things have gone. Not insignificant amount of investment, right? And I often say that we're the earliest investor in some of these great opportunities.
Okay, thank you. The question, Carter and Caroline can answer. What advice do you have for researchers on balancing the academic demands with the entrepreneurial aspects? I know, Carter, you started as a postdoc. Caroline, you're an academic professor. How do you manage your time, this work-life balance, and keeping up that scientific rigor at the same time?
So, the thing is, it's not difficult to balance. It's just that because it's not a chore, I guess is the thing. It's not as if, oh gosh, I've got to now do this or do that. It's more competing, equally exciting interests. So, and that comes with, right, that comes with personal challenges, just like any interest. But I think I've had success in kind of weaving my interest in commercializable research into my other university roles. So I now teach entrepreneurship courses. And I also, serve the university in some of their innovation initiatives. And I developed, student programs to train entrepreneurship. And so that kind of keeps my activities aligned with my university's mission, which probably most universities, if you check the mission statements, they now include not just education and service, but they also include an obligation to translate discovery to societal benefit. And so, that keeps that in alignment. Also is beneficial for my commercializable work because I'm kind of like in network, if you will. Just because of the service and the kinds of things I provide, I'm very closely in touch with the sort of the commercialization machinery at the university. And, that's helpful. You learn about opportunities, you learn about webinars and things that are coming up. And in turn, you can also share that with your colleagues and grab them and encourage them to go. And so that's part of what I do and I enjoy. And kind of it's now really, it's not so much a balance as it's all like one thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. And I think that's how very much I viewed it once we became really serious about Third Element. From a trainee standpoint, I do think it's quite different. And so maybe I'll speak to that a little bit. I think at the end of the day, you have, I guess, three types of PIs in this situation, or at least this is how I've sort of bucketed them. If you're interested in commercialization, hopefully you know that going into either your PhD or your postdoc. And then I strongly encourage you to go find PIs like Caroline, who are going to be supportive of this, who understand what that looks like. And again, are interested in doing science that will be translational and then potentially supporting you as you start to translate it. That's not always the case though, right? So I think there's a second bucket, which is the PI who doesn't know about this as an opportunity. And then I think that's really your opportunity to learn and educate with them, right? Have TTO go and talk to that PI and have these conversations with them. Try to explain what the advantages are to this commercialization. And really for academic research, it means something if you can go and commercialize something, right? Again, they're going to be more likely to get grants. These patents are things that they can add on to their grants to say, hey, we've accomplished something, we're pushing technology forward that can be really beneficial. I think at the end of the day, there's a third bucket of academic who has no interest whatsoever and isn't going to support you. In that situation, I think it's really hard to balance these two. I think you can do some work on the side and nights and do these accelerator programs, but I also encourage you to move to a better situation at that point in time, right? Wrap up your academic work there and then find a situation that can help you grow into a commercialization path. Sometimes you're going to hit an immovable object and there's no point in running headfirst into that object over and over. So I guess that's balance from a trainee point of view.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? We're coming close to 2 p.m. We have about 5 more minutes. You can enter your questions in the QA box. One of the questions that was asked, what's the pathway if the university decided not to proceed with the full pathway application?
I guess that one falls to me. Let me put on my administrator hat, right, and come back to policy and all the fun things that everyone likes to talk about, right? So, at most universities, there is a pathway. If the TTO has reviewed an invention and said, maybe this is not, we don't see, a path forward, and you would like to take rights back to that invention. Usually there is a pathway for doing so. Usually that pathway is articulated in your university's intellectual property policy. So that would be a place to go look for details for your specific institution. At KU, for example, right, there is a process whereby you request that we basically release ownership of that invention back to you. We will go ahead and consider that. Most of the time, we're going to approve it, provided we've been able to do our diligence and again, sort of make an educated decision. Right. And then there is a contract or a letter or however your university does it that confers and transfers ownership of that invention back to the individual, and then you are allowed to go, develop it yourself, right? The viewpoint I usually take with that is, right, if we've looked at this and we've been considerate and we don't think there's a way we can help move this forward, but you still believe in it, then our best job is to try to get out of the way if we can. Couple caveats there, though, that if the invention was created using federal funding, so off of a grant, or off of a contract, the sponsor usually has the option of sort of stepping in before we can release ownership back to the inventors themselves, right? So we have to go through NIH and ask NIH, are you okay with us giving this invention back to the inventors? So anyway, because it varies a little bit university to university. It can be a little bit difficult, but generally there is a pathway for going and asking for the rights back. Your university will have some sort of approval process for that. Caveat being that if there is a funder involved, the funder may have the first option to go and try to lead and take ownership of that invention before we can release it back to the inventors.
Thank you. Cliff, can you put something in the chat box? Could you resend that to everyone? I don't think everybody can see those resources you added. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I put in just a handful of those open innovation platforms that I had mentioned. And so, yeah, I see I didn't send it to everybody. I will resend it to everybody, Kanika.
Okay. And someone's been asking, Caroline, you mentioned some entrepreneur courses. How could they join or apply?
Sure. So I think maybe what the question is about the NSF I-Corps program. I have developed and teach some courses at my university on entrepreneurship. Which just go over some sort of basics, and one of them we split the class into teams and they mock up a business and pitch, and those kinds of things are fun to run. But I assume that the person is asking about things like these accelerator programs like NSF Core, or if you're a student, as Carter mentioned, Nucleate. So again, go to that in the resources page. There's an NSF Core link. You can find the closest hub in your area, and then hopefully you can find whether or not your university is part of it, or if there's a university close by you, like in your state or nearby, where they are part of an NSF hub entity. There'll be a contact at that point, and you could reach out to that person and say, I'm at such and such place. We maybe don't have our own I-Corps training program. Could I enroll in your next session? Not guaranteed, but I know in our hub we accept people who would contact us that way, or we would refer them to whoever is closest to them in order to kind of have them participate. And so that would be a recommendation. And you can also ask your institution for other accelerator programs. that may be in the area. My state has one specific for bioscience, for example. It's a state-run program, and again, there's no charge to participate. And one of the advantages of not only do you learn, but you also, you'll get exposed to industry mentors. And typically there's a pitch event at the end. Some of them are big, some of them are small. Some of them have prizes. Some of them have investors, so it's a great way to, in a cohort sort of setting where you've got other teams working with you, sharing, their challenges. It's actually a really great, I'm still in touch with some of the companies that I've gone through accelerators with. And it's a great way to start a network and to, really feel some support as you're moving forward.
Thank you, Caroline.
Just pick up real quick on what Caroline said, which is the network piece, right? Going back to the earlier answer about industry partnerships and such, and all of the fundraising, all these, right? Those soft skills and that network that you build through these kind of activities is extremely beneficial in all aspects. And I think sometimes we think it's all about the science and we forget that the people matter, right? In helping get an innovation off the ground, or to get some great industry sponsored project going or collaboration going. Nope, people are important too. And so don't lose sight of that. That network really is a critical ingredient.
All right, thank you. There were so many questions, not enough time. This is a really interesting topic. For people who had some questions that were not answered, I know some of people wanted to reach out to you, the speakers. Please reach out to them through LinkedIn. They'll be more than happy to answer any additional questions you may have for them. Thank you, Caroline, Carter, and Clifford for joining us. This was a great discussion. And thanks to our audience members for joining us. And we hope today to spark some new ideas and connections. And I just want to tell everybody to take care and enjoy the rest of your day.